How did a young man from a small northern kingdom conquer most of the known world before he turned 33? That question is the engine of this series. I am talking about Alexander of Macedon. Macedon was an ancient kingdom that lies in modern-day northern Greece. You probably know him as Alexander the Great. He did not start as a nobody. His father was Philip II, king of Macedon, and Philip had rebuilt the army and the state in ways that made Alexander's campaigns possible. That family background matters. It changes everything. By the end of his life, Alexander had pushed his banners across 3 large regions. He moved through Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey. He swept through the Persian lands that cover much of what we now call Iran and Iraq. He marched into Egypt, and then he pushed all the way to the edge of the Indian subcontinent, in areas that are now Pakistan and northwest India. Think about that for a second. In roughly 10 years, he changed the map across lands that today sit in 3 continents. Now, the title Alexander the Great raises a few practical questions. Was he great because of the size of his empire? Or because he rarely lost a battle? Or because he founded cities like Alexandria in Egypt that later became centers of learning? Or was he great because he tried, in a way no one else had, to blend Greek and local cultures across vast regions? I want to examine those claims with you and be honest about them. Some of his moves were brilliant. Some were reckless. Some created long-term effects that historians still debate. Here is how we will proceed. I will keep things focused. First, we will look at where he came from and who shaped him. Then we will trace the key campaigns and the decisions that mattered most. After that, we will step into his personal life, his attempts to hold an empire together, and finally, what happened after he died in Babylon, which is in modern-day Iraq. Along the way, I will point out the moments that show why his name still matters, and the moments that show his limits. If you want the dramatic highlights and the clear facts, without myths and without overload, you are in the right place. Let's start with his origins and what he inherited from his father. Part 1. Birth and Early Life. Alexander was born in the year 356 BC in a place called Pella. Today, Pella sits in northern Greece, and at the time, it was the capital of the Kingdom of Macedon. Remember, his father was not some minor noble. Philip II was king, and Philip had already rebuilt the Macedonian state into a serious military power. That fact matters, because Alexander inherited more than a crown. He inherited an army and a plan. His mother was Olympias, originally a princess from Epirus, a neighboring region to Macedon. She married Philip and became queen, and she was known for her strong personality and deep religious devotion. Ancient storytellers often described Alexander's birth as a moment of destiny. One myth says that on the night Philip and Olympias consummated their marriage, a bolt of lightning struck Olympias's womb. People at the time believed this meant that Alexander was fathered not by Philip, but by Zeus himself. In ancient Greek mythology, Zeus was the king of the gods, the ruler of the sky and thunder, and the most powerful divine figure. These stories are not historical fact, but they mattered deeply in shaping how Olympias viewed her son and how others around him came to see him as someone marked out for greatness from birth. Education played a big role in his formation. Around the age of 13, he was sent to study with Aristotle, one of Greece's greatest thinkers. Imagine a teenager learning poetry, science, medicine, and politics from a philosopher who had once studied under Plato. Plato was one of the most famous philosophers of the ancient world, a student of Socrates and the teacher of Aristotle, and his ideas still influence philosophy today. Aristotle gave Alexander a copy of Homer's Iliad and advised him to see himself in that tradition of heroic action. Homer was an ancient Greek poet, and the Iliad was his epic about the Trojan War and the warriors who fought in it, especially the hero Achilles. That Homeric influence is one of the threads that runs through Alexander's life. It taught him to think in terms of honor, glory, and reputation, and it gave him a model for how to present himself to the world. Now for the fun story that people still repeat because it makes a neat scene. There was a horse, and not just any horse. Its name was Bucephalus. The story goes that a horse trader brought this animal to the court, claiming the horse was priceless. Nobody could ride it. It was skittish and wild. Alexander was only about 12 years old when he walked up, looked at the horse, and said he could ride it. The older men laughed and dismissed him, but Alexander insisted. He noticed something others had missed. The animal was afraid of its own shadow. So he turned the horse toward the sun so that the shadow was behind it, calmed it, and then mounted. After that, Bucephalus became Alexander's companion for many years. If you're thinking that sounds like a PR stunt, well, maybe. But it also shows something simple about him. Even as a boy, he paid attention to details that others overlooked. He showed confidence and the willingness to take a visible risk in front of important people. Those qualities, close observation, bold action, and a flair for theater, would appear again and again in his life. Two quick points to keep in mind before we move on. First, Alexander was not only trained in ideas, he grew up around soldiers and was taught war as a craft. Second, the mix of a politically powerful father, a dramatic mother, and a classical education created a personality driven by both ambition and narrative. He wanted to act, and he wanted to be remembered. Next, we will follow the moment that changed everything. His father's assassination, Alexander stepping onto the throne at age 20, and how he moved fast to secure his position. But before that, one small human detail to hold on to. The boy who calmed a frightened horse was someone who learned early that attention and courage can change outcomes. That pattern is a useful way to read the rest of his life.
Part 2. Alexander's rise to power. At the age of 20, Alexander's life changed completely. His father, King Philip II, was assassinated in 336 BC during a public celebration in the city of Aegi, which is in modern-day northern Greece. Imagine that. Your father builds an empire, lays out a master plan, and just when everything is ready, he's suddenly gone. That could have been the end of Macedon's rise, but for Alexander, it was the beginning. He acted with incredible speed. First, he secured his throne by removing potential rivals, both inside his family and among the nobility. Then he turned to the Greek city-states. Many of them thought Philip's death meant Macedon's control was finished. It almost sounds reasonable, right? The powerful king is dead, his son is young, so why not break free? But Alexander was not the type to let things slide. Some cities submitted without a fight, but Thebes, a strong city in central Greece, decided to resist. And here is where Alexander showed exactly what kind of king he intended to be. He marched to Thebes, surrounded it, and ordered a full assault. Thebes was destroyed. Thousands of its people were killed or sold into slavery. Only temples and the house of the poet Pindar were spared. Pindar, by the way, was one of Greece's most famous lyric poets. Alexander sparing his house was not random. It was his way of saying, "I may crush your city, but I respect your culture." Brutal, but calculated. Now, let's pause on that for a moment. The destruction of Thebes wasn't just about defeating one rebellious city. It was a performance, a warning to every other Greek state. Cross me, and this is your future. And the message landed. Athens, Sparta, and the rest kept quiet. So, in a strange way, the blood of Thebes bought peace everywhere else. Not exactly a nice lesson, but definitely an effective one. With Greece under control, Alexander turned his eyes east. His father Philip II had spent years reforming the army and preparing for a war against the Persian Empire.
Persia at this time was massive, stretching from modern-day Turkey across Iran and into Central Asia. By taking the throne, Alexander didn't just inherit Philip's army, he inherited Philip's dream. So here we are, a 20-year-old, fresh from crushing rebellion, now standing as king of Macedon, master of Greece, and commander of one of the most advanced armies of the ancient world. And instead of settling down to rule in peace, he's already planning the invasion of the greatest empire of his time. Not bad for someone who wasn't even old enough, by our standards, to rent a car.
Part 3. The Conquests. Once Greece was secured, Alexander set his sights on the east. His first major test came in 334 BC at the Battle of the Granicus River, which is in modern-day Turkey. The Persian Empire controlled the region, and this was Alexander's chance to prove himself against them. Crossing the river under enemy fire was risky, but Alexander led the charge himself. He fought in the thick of the battle, nearly losing his life when a Persian noble aimed a killing blow at him. One of his companions cut the attacker down just in time. Victory at Granicus gave Alexander control over Asia Minor, the region we now call Turkey, and it set the tone. Bold risks, personal courage, and a reputation for being unstoppable. The next major clash was at Issus in 333 BC, near the modern border of Turkey and Syria. This time, Alexander faced the Persian king himself, Darius III. Darius commanded a much larger army, but Alexander's tactics turned the numbers to his advantage. He attacked with his cavalry, broke through the Persian lines, and forced Darius to flee. In the chaos, Alexander captured Darius's family, including his wife and daughters. Now here is where Alexander did something unusual for his time. Instead of humiliating them, he treated them with respect and even insisted they be honored as royalty. Smart politics. It showed that while he could be ruthless in battle, he also knew when mercy could work in his favor. From Issus, Alexander marched south. He secured the eastern Mediterranean coast, capturing Tyre and Gaza after difficult sieges. Control of the coastline meant the Persian navy had nowhere left to anchor. Then he moved into Egypt. Unlike other places, Egypt did not resist. In fact, the Egyptians welcomed Alexander as a liberator because they had resented Persian rule. In Memphis, he was crowned as Pharaoh, the traditional ruler of Egypt. And here Alexander made one of his most lasting moves. He founded the city of Alexandria, located on the Mediterranean coast. That city became a hub of trade and learning for centuries, famous for its great library and lighthouse. The decisive showdown with Persia came in 331 BC at the Battle of Gaugamela near modern Mosul in Iraq. This was the moment. Darius gathered a massive army, possibly the largest he ever commanded. On paper, Alexander was badly outnumbered, but once again, tactics won the day. He kept his formations tight, used the terrain to his advantage, and at the right moment, he led a direct cavalry charge straight at Darius. Once again, the Persian king fled. Without their king, the Persian troops broke, and the empire was effectively Alexander's. He marched into Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis, the great capitals of Persia, located in modern Iraq and Iran. In Persepolis, the ceremonial capital, his army famously burned part of the royal palace. Some say it was revenge for the Persian invasion of Greece a century earlier. Others say it was simply drunken celebration. Either way, the image of Alexander watching the Persian palace burn has lasted as one of the most dramatic moments of his conquests. Now, most people would have stopped there, conquer Persia, take the throne, and call it a career. But Alexander was not most people. He pushed further east into Central Asia, into territories that cover today's Afghanistan and Uzbekistan. These were not easy victories. The land was harsh, the resistance fierce, and Alexander spent years fighting guerrilla-style warfare, marrying local leaders into a circle, and founding more cities to secure control. It was during this time that he married Roxana, the daughter of a local noble from Bactria, which is in modern Afghanistan.
But even that wasn't enough. Alexander turned toward India. In 326 BC, he fought at the Battle of the Hydaspes River, which is in modern Pakistan. His opponent was King Porus, who commanded war elephants, a terrifying sight for soldiers who had never faced them before. Despite the challenge, Alexander's tactics once again won the day. Porus was defeated, but Alexander respected his courage. Instead of removing him, he allowed Porus to continue ruling his kingdom as a subordinate ally. It was one of those moments where Alexander showed both ruthlessness and respect in the same stroke. By this time, Alexander's empire stretched across an enormous part of the world. From Greece in the west, across modern-day Turkey, Syria, Egypt, and Iraq, through Iran, Afghanistan, and into Pakistan. Think about that for a moment. His soldiers had marched over deserts, mountains, and rivers, covering a distance of nearly 10,000 kilometers. That is roughly the same as walking from New York across the United States, over the Atlantic Ocean, across Europe, and all the way into the heart of Asia, on foot, in armor, while fighting battles along the way. So when Alexander ordered them to push further east toward the Ganges River in India, the men finally broke. They were exhausted, homesick, and many had not seen their families in over a decade. According to ancient accounts, the refusal happened at the Hyphasis River, which is in modern Punjab in India. The soldiers gathered together and simply would not move. Alexander pleaded with them, tried to inspire them with visions of new lands and greater glory, but it didn't work this time. For once, his charisma and authority weren't enough. In the end, Alexander had no choice but to agree. The march forward was abandoned, and he turned his army back to Babylon, the great city that stood in what is now Iraq, near the modern city of Hilla. But the decision wasn't instant. The men forced him to stay in camp for several days while he sulked in silence, hoping they would change their minds. They didn't. It was the first and only time Alexander's will met an immovable wall, the endurance of his own soldiers. And maybe this is the great irony of his story. Alexander conquered kingdoms, toppled empires, and crushed enemies in battle. Yet the one thing he could not conquer was the simple human need for rest. No matter how great a leader is, there are always limits. And there, at the edge of India, Alexander finally found his. And here's something we shouldn't overlook. It wasn't just the victories that made Alexander remarkable. It was the sheer logistics of what he pulled off. Picture this: tens of thousands of men, plus horses, weapons, and camp followers, marching for over a decade across deserts, mountains, and rivers. They crossed the Hellespont into modern-day Turkey, marched through Syria, Egypt, Mesopotamia, in Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and all the way into India. That is a distance of thousands upon thousands of kilometers, and they did it on foot, with no trucks, no trains, no airplanes, no instant communication. Every message had to be carried by a single rider. Every meal for tens of thousands had to be hunted, grown, bought, or taken from conquered lands. When rivers blocked their path, they used ferries, seized ships, or even lashed animal skins into rafts just to get across. And remember, while Alexander was pushing further east, he still had to keep control of the lands he had already taken. Greece was held together by loyal governors like Antipater. Persia was divided into provinces ruled by satraps, and newly founded cities like Alexandria became supply hubs to anchor his empire. Think about that. He wasn't just fighting battles. He was simultaneously ruling, organizing, and feeding one of the largest armies the world had ever seen at the point the largest empire it had ever known. The fact that the empire didn't collapse instantly while he was thousands of kilometers away is almost as astonishing as the victories themselves. Part 4. The personal life of Alexander the Great. Behind all the battles and conquests, Alexander was still a man, and like all great figures, his personal life was complicated. Marriage was one of the ways he tried to balance politics and personal ties. His first and perhaps most famous wife was Roxana, a princess from Bactria, which is in modern-day Afghanistan. Their marriage took place after Alexander's conquest of that region. It may have involved genuine affection, but it was also a political move, meant to unite his Macedonian followers with the people of Central Asia. Later, in the Persian city of Susa, in modern-day Iran, Alexander staged one of the most extraordinary mass weddings in history. Thousands of his officers married Persian noblewomen in a single grand ceremony. Alexander himself took 2 additional wives of Persian royal blood, Statera, the daughter of the defeated Persian king Darius III, and Parysatis, the daughter of the earlier Persian king Artaxerxes III. Through these marriages, Alexander was sending a clear message. He did not want to remain a foreign conqueror. He wanted to blend Macedonian and Persian elites into one shared family, creating a new empire that went beyond old divisions. There were also rumors that Alexander fathered a son outside of marriage. Ancient sources claim that he had an illegitimate son named Heracles, whose mother was Barsine, a Persian noblewoman. This child never played a central role in Alexander's plans, but his existence adds another layer to the story of Alexander's private life. And then there was Hephaestion, his closest companion from boyhood. Hephaestion grew up with Alexander, and the two studied together under Aristotle when they were around 13. That early bond lasted a lifetime. On campaign, Hephaestion was not only a general, but also Alexander's most trusted confidant. Alexander even elevated him to the position of Chiliarch, second in command of the empire, and arranged for him to marry Drupadis, the sister of Statera. His reasoning was simple. He wanted their children to be bound to his own family, strengthening their connection even further. Ancient writers often compared Alexander and Hephaestion to Achilles and Patroclus from Homer's Iliad, and the comparison was not casual. Achilles and Patroclus represented the ideal of 2 warriors bound together by loyalty, love, and shared destiny. For Alexander, who carried a copy of the Iliad with him on campaign, this was more than symbolism. It was part of how he saw his own life. Some historians believe the bond between him and Hephaestion may have gone beyond friendship. In the Macedonian court, intimacy between men was not unusual, particularly among elites and soldiers who lived side by side for years at war. One later Roman writer, Claudius Aelianus, even claimed outright that Hephaestion was the object of Alexander's love. Whether or not that is true, what cannot be doubted is the depth of their connection. Alexander loved him fiercely. It was the kind of relationship that shaped not just Alexander's private life, but also his public world. When Hephaestion died suddenly in 324 BC, likely from a fever, Alexander was shattered. He draped himself over the body, refused food, cut his hair in mourning, and staged an extravagant funeral that rivaled the death of a king. He even asked whether Hephaestion could be worshipped as a god. The grief consumed him, and many believe he never fully recovered. Less than a year later, Alexander himself was gone. And maybe that is where the personal and the political meet most clearly. The man who dreamed of conquering the world, who united cultures and reshaped history, was still vulnerable to the same human pains as the rest of us. He could win empires, but he could not survive the loss of the person closest to his heart. In a way, Hephaestion's death marked the beginning of Alexander's own end. Part 5. Decline and Death. After more than a decade of conquest, even Alexander's army began to break under the strain. His men had marched thousands of kilometers through deserts, mountains, and rivers. By the time they turned back from India, they were exhausted, scarred, and weary of endless war. Alexander still dreamed of new horizons, but his army no longer shared his vision. In 323 BC, Alexander returned to Babylon, the great city in what is now Iraq, near the modern town of Hilla. Babylon was meant to be the new capital of his empire, the place where he would launch fresh campaigns into Arabia and beyond. But fate intervened. That June, after one of his famous banquets, Alexander suddenly fell ill. Ancient accounts disagree on the cause. Some said he developed a fever after heavy drinking. Others whispered of poison. Modern historians tend to believe he died of disease, such as malaria or typhoid. But the truth has never been settled. Over less than 2 weeks, his condition worsened. He suffered fever, weakness, pain, and even partial paralysis. Yet he remained conscious long enough to greet his soldiers as they filed past his bed one last time, for a farewell that must have left them shaken. Soon after, he could no longer speak, and at the age of 32, Alexander the Great, the man who had never lost a battle, was gone. The mystery deepened after his death. Ancient writers claimed that for 6 days, his body showed no signs of decomposition. To the Greeks, this was proof that Alexander was not just a man, but something closer to a god. Others saw it as a sign that he had been poisoned. Some even believed the poison came from the river Styx, a legendary river said to separate the world of the living from the underworld. The river is real, known today as the Mavroneri in Greece, and ancient people believed its waters were deadly to drink. Later writers imagined that water from the Styx had been slipped into Alexander's wine. Modern scientists suggest that natural toxins may indeed have existed in those waters, which kept the legend alive. Whether his end was caused by disease or by poison, Alexander's death felt almost unbelievable. A man who survived countless battles, wounds, and hardships was not defeated by an enemy's sword, but something invisible. His passing was a stark reminder that even the greatest conqueror in history was still mortal, and that greatness itself is fragile. Part 6. The Legacy. When Alexander died so suddenly, the question of who would rule after him became a disaster waiting to happen. His empire, stretching from Greece to India, was far too vast for any one man to hold together, and Alexander left no clear adult heir. He had 3 wives, Roxana of Bactria, Statira II, who was the daughter of the defeated Persian king Darius III, and Parasitis II, daughter of the earlier Persian king Artaxerxes III. These marriages had been part of his vision of uniting Macedonian and Persian elites into one family. But in the brutal world of succession, these women became pawns in a deadly game. Roxana was the wife who mattered most. She was pregnant when Alexander died and later gave birth to his only legitimate son, Alexander IV. For a time, the generals agreed that Roxana and her child should be recognized as heirs, with the generals ruling as protectors until the boy came of age. But power is a dangerous prize, and loyalty to Alexander's family quickly gave way to ambition. Statira and Parasitis did not live long after Alexander's death. Most ancient accounts suggest that Roxana arranged their murders to remove rivals for her son's future. Yet even Roxana and Alexander IV could not escape the ruthless struggle that followed. The empire split among Alexander's top generals, known as the Diadochi, who carved it into separate kingdoms. Cassander, one of these generals, eventually seized power in Macedon. To secure his rule, he had Roxana and the young Alexander IV murdered around 310 BC. In the space of just over a decade, Alexander's entire direct bloodline was wiped out. And yet, while his family and empire collapsed, his cultural influence only grew. The lands he conquered entered what we call the Hellenistic Age, a time when Greek culture spread across the Middle East and into Asia. Greek language, art, and ideas blended with local traditions, creating a fusion of East and West that shaped history for centuries. Cities like Alexandria in Egypt became centers of learning and trade, keeping his vision alive long after his dynasty was gone. That is the paradox of Alexander's legacy. His empire did not survive him, but his cultural impact outlasted almost every conqueror who came after. His name still echoes more than 2,000 years later, remembered as the man who dreamed of conquering the world and came closer than almost anyone else in history. And so we circle back to the question we started with. What makes Alexander the Great? It was not just the battles he won or the lands he conquered. It was his vision that set him apart. He believed in shaping the world into something larger than the boundaries he inherited, fusing cultures and leaving behind more than just ruins. That ambition, brilliant and dangerous at the same time, is what has kept his name alive for over 2,000 years. He reminds us that greatness is not only measured by what you conquer, but by the mark you leave on history. So, if you've made it this far, first of all, congratulations! You've just marched through Alexander's entire life without even leaving your chair. Now it's your turn. Drop your hottest take about Alexander the Great in the comments. Was he a genius, a tyrant, or both? And here's a bonus one. Do you think his bond with Hephaestion was the ultimate bromance of history, or something even deeper? Let's see what you got. And of course, hit that subscribe button for more epic stories like this one. Because history is way too wild to be left in the dusty pages of old books, we're bringing it back to life right here on this channel.